Soulslike Games, a genre that really started with a very dedicated cult following but has honestly become so popular over the years. From FromSoftware games like Elden Ring and the Dark Souls series, to other companies also making Souls-likes, such as Lies of P, Lords of the Fallen, and even another Crab's Treasures, there are so many different Souls-like games that are coming out. And honestly, can you blame them? It's the go-to genre for the I'm a gamer and I'm good at games type of video games, where, you know, if you beat one of these types of games, you're going to be talking about it for quite some time. Seriously. The whole get good catchphrase was really popularized because of these types of games, just with how ridiculously difficult some of these bosses were. But if you're a newcomer to this genre completely, where do you even get started? There's so much cruft to get through, and it can really be confusing even where to begin in taking a stab at this genre in general. Hello everybody, my name is Marks, and today I'm going to be giving a Souls-like 101 for all of you people who want to get into the genre, or you know somebody who they are confused on where to start, and so hopefully you can make some recommendations to get them into these games. Okay, so quickly, just defining what a Souls-like game is, well, it all started back in 2009 from a lovely PS3 game called Demon's Souls, and it really was just a drastically new style of game that really wowed audiences. It's a gothic medieval fantasy game, but was really known for just being extremely difficult, almost to an unforgiving scale. And this is what I mean when I talk about a very cult following prompting from these games, because gamers just really wanted to buckle down and master this thing in order to beat it. And so when we talk about the characteristics of what a Souls-like game is, it's an action role-playing game that is just extremely difficult. Seriously, even when I looked this up on Wikipedia, it says that the core concepts of high difficulty, repeated character death, driving player knowledge, and mastery of the game world and pattern recognition, there is a huge emphasis here on being just an extremely unforgiving environment. So in this third-person action game with a lot of melee combat and honestly just a lot of dodge rolling, or parrying depending on which type of game you're looking at. But the whole fun of this genre is just being able to survive and overcome a lot of challenge in this extremely difficult environment that has been created by whatever twisted masterminds are behind the game that you are playing. Seriously, you're not really here for the lore. It really is purely gameplay challenge focused. Once you do get into it, then you can start to peel back layers of the lore and all that type of stuff. It's a fun rabbit hole to go down. But genuinely, if you're starting things out, it's all about being able to overcome great challenge in front of you. And so the world is designed to simply be very unforgiving. And the game really wants you to know it, by the way. From chests that act as mimics, to enemies surprising you around corners or off of ceilings, to random traps that you're just going to be walking around and suddenly boom, you're dead, or from fall damage from trying to do something or something unfair happening and you accidentally rolling off a cliff. These are all extremely characteristic to just all types of Souls-like games. Really, this still is an RPG game at the end of the day, and so as you are defeating enemies and all that type of stuff, you collect souls, which can then be used to level up your character at these checkpoints throughout the game. The checkpoints, though, are very sparsely placed throughout the entire level, and so you kind of get into this weird pattern where you've been going on for a long time and you've taken out so many enemies and made a lot of progress, and so you've got a lot of souls in your pocket, but at any moment you could just suddenly die and then you lose all that progress and go back to that save point and have to redo everything just to get your souls back because you drop them on death. And the best part too is every time you use one of these checkpoints, it's going to respawn every single enemy that you've encountered along the way. Especially when you are so close to reaching a checkpoint and you suddenly just die, then you get sent all the way back and suddenly you have to do all of that progress again in order to just get your souls back so you can potentially level yourself up more. And because dying is really easy in these types of games, you could lose a lot of progress just by like a silly mistake, like you accidentally dodge rolled the wrong way and oh, you're off the cliff, resulting in losing all those hard-earned souls you got. And also now we have to trudge through all those enemies again, or potentially fight the boss from all the way at the start. And that is another element of the Souls games that you can definitely expect pretty much across the board, are these absolutely massive boss fights where the difficulty jumps from like, oh, we're doing okay, to how the heck am I gonna kill this massive dragon thing that's about to just annihilate me. These boss fights are almost massive in scale and feel almost epic in proportion. And on top of that too, they can, generally speaking, one-shot you the very first time you go and fight them. And so there's a lot to fear. A lot of the challenge gets introduced when you actually enter into these boss arenas, and then you figure out how to master your rolling at just the right time in order to take that boss out and claim victory over your opponent. Once again, The whole appeal of these games is when you are finally able to beat an extremely difficult boss and you become stronger because of it. Usually mastering not only your moveset, but the boss's moves in order to properly dodge it, and you get rewarded with just a buttload of souls in order to make sure you can continue to level yourself up. And so if you're going into this for the first time, what are some general tips to help ease you into playing this game? What are some stuff that you should be aware of? Well, first up, expect to die a lot. It's about learning the map or your enemies and how to counter them and roll all the time, all that type of stuff. And while it's frustrating losing souls all the time and it feels like you've lost a lot of progress, you're always going to be able to get more. So you should almost look at yourself like that new upcoming movie called Mickey 17, where you just want to die so that you gain the experience and then you can farm things later and level yourself up afterwards. It's not that big of a deal. And speaking of leveling up, the most important thing you always want to prioritize first is going to be your health and your stamina. These games are all about min-maxing, meaning you need to make sure you are dumping all of your levels into that one stat that's going to actually be helpful for you and keeping the rest of them just being at a passable level. And this is really determined by what type of weapon you want to use. And so early on, you're able to try out a couple of different weapons, but as soon as you lock in on something like, say it's going to be a great sword, well, congratulations. Every time you level up, when you are going to be dumping your skill points into something, it's always going to be strength. And for your weapons, you're going to get so many different weapons throughout the game. I mean, they just throw weapons at you left, right, and center, and all of them seem like they're going to be fun, but because of the whole leveling system where you really have to invest in one stat over everything else, you're going to be locked into certain weapon types. What I mean by this, following that example, if you really like that beginner greatsword, well, you're going to be getting more greatswords as you progress throughout the game. And of course, there are going to be more magical greatswords that kind of exist. So you might need to increase your intelligence stat just to make sure that you've got enough intelligence to use the actual new greatsword that you're using, but it's still always going to be a strength-based weapon. And inevitably, when you do find yourself in those difficult situations where it just feels like you're dying so quickly all of the time, honestly, don't be afraid to grind for levels. These are not one of those types of games where it's like, well, I defeated every enemy along the way to the boss, therefore I should be able to go to the boss and I should be able to win. No, just take that idea out of your mind right now. What you want to do is find some spots where some enemies will pop out that are generally speaking going to give you enough souls, and then just go back to the checkpoint, rest up at the bonfire, and then just run it again. Kill those enemies, get their souls, then rest again. They respawn, you kill them again, and keep on going until you're able to get a couple more levels under your belt. While it could take some time, this is going to be extremely helpful, especially too when you get stuck on some of those tougher bosses, because you need to give yourself as many advantages as possible. And like I said, these bosses are of epic proportion, and even though you master every single move and you've got all of the timings down, if you make a single mistake, it could be over just like that. The other thing too is don't feel like you have to kill all the enemies along the way either. If you feel like you are sufficiently leveled and you've gone through and explored everything already, you can just run past all of the enemies. Generally speaking, if you're running, they're not going to be able to hit you properly, or you got to do a dodge every now and then, but it can get you back to the point that you were at where you died, and you can pick up your souls and everything is going to be fine without as much of a headache having to kill every single thing in your way, yet again, saving you a lot of time. And my last piece of advice is actually look up guides. Like straight up, this is a godsend when I first started playing. It's gonna walk you through exactly where you need to go, how to beat certain bosses, and pretty much everything. Like I said, these are very difficult games, and so when you're starting out, it's almost impossible to do anything before you actually start to learn the language of these Soulsborne games. For example, the one thing that stands out to me that I had to look up a guide for is in Elden Ring. At one point, to go onto this lift, you had to switch your action to hold up a secret medallion instead of the normal medallion, which opens up a whole new area towards the end game. Genuinely speaking, I would not have been able to figure that out if I didn't just look up a guide for it. Seriously, these are the type of games that these things are, where it's so finicky and so specific. Even like hitting the wall and revealing a secret area, things like that exist in these types of games, so please do not be afraid to look up a guide, at least to help you walk through some of these levels. It will help you get more familiar with it, and then once you feel like you're able to make meaningful progress, that's when you feel like you're at the point like, okay, maybe I can not look at the guide as much and just play through and enjoy the game. But honestly, these games are like learning a new language. Until it really clicks in, it's very difficult to understand what is going on in the world, and that can really scare a lot of players off. So now that you've got an idea on what these Souls-like games are, what are some recommended games to start out with so that you aren't just kind of going into it blind? Like, where is a good entry point into the Souls-like games? And for me, of course, FromSoft is going to be king, and I've got two recommendations depending on what type of gamer you are. The first one is obvious. To me, it's Elden Ring. Elden Ring honestly just modernizes and it has so many quality of life features into the Souls-like genre that really is a lot more beginner friendly. The thing with Elden Ring though is because it is more of an open world game, you really have to just immerse yourself into the actual world in order to get everything that you want out of it. It can be a little bit overwhelming. I even get overwhelmed at times, but it genuinely is one of the easier points to get into just because there is so much more player feedback in the game and it is more modernized so you don't have to deal with a bunch of the BS and movement and all that type of stuff from the previous Souls-like games. But if the scale of Elden Ring is just a little bit too big, I think another good starting point is actually Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 was my entry into the series, and this one operates a lot more linearly, which I think is actually a bonus because it helps guide you through your objectives. You kind of have a better idea on where you're going, what you need to do, and still it's not exactly as polished as Elden Ring with all of the combat mechanics and stuff like that, but it still is pretty beginner friendly in that sense because it's learning from all of the previous Dark Souls as well as a couple other of the FromSoft games in order to really just smoothen out the combat experience. So take your pick. If you like that more open world, Elden Ring, excellent, fantastic choice, but if that's too overwhelming, then going for a more linear game like Dark Souls 3, that is an excellent entry point as well. But alrighty, that wraps up this Souls-like 101. Let me know if this was helpful, but more importantly, down in the comments below, what do you think is the best Souls-like game to start with? And so what was the game for you that really helped you click in? For me, Bloodborne was the one that really clicked and spoke to me. It's because I really like that whole like eldritch lore type of stuff, and that kind of captivated me in its stylized game. But that just about wraps up this video. Thank you so much for watching. And hey, you know what? While you're here, speaking of old games like Demon's Souls, why not check out this video I did about Titanfall 2, which in my opinion is an extremely good game, but pretty much is forgotten by the current zeitgeist. And I don't think that they're ever going to make a new Titanfall, which really breaks my heart, but you know, sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. I would even make the argument to say that Titanfall really ushered in that whole wave of shooters that really were inspired by sci-fi futuristic settings where, you know, you got some sort of mech kit attached to your person that allowed you to fly around.